I did not cry when my husband introduced his mistress to thousands of people at our son's graduation. I simply unlocked my phone. One short call, 4 words as cold as a knife, and everything he had built on lies began to crack right there in the stadium. By the time the applause faded, he realized that tonight was not his victory. It was his judgment. My name is Elena Hartwell, and at 37 years old, I have learned that silence is the most expensive currency a woman can pay. I stood in the VIP section of the stadium at Redwood Crest University, surrounded by the kind of wealth that whispers rather than shouts. Here in Canyon Vista, status was not determined by your bank account balance, but by where you sat and who the cameras found. I wore a simple cream dress that blended into the background. I was not here to be seen. I was here for Caleb. My son was the valedictorian of the business school. He had spent 4 years studying while his peers partied. Today was supposed to be his triumph. All I wanted was a peaceful ceremony, a quiet capstone to 18 years of keeping my head down and my mouth shut. But Graham Pierce does not do quiet. My husband, the CEO of Northbridge Dynamics, was late. He was always late. It was his way of telling the world that his time was worth more than anyone else's. The ceremony was already running for 45 minutes when the murmurs began near the reserved entrance. I saw heads turn. I saw the familiar flash of recognition in the eyes of the board members sitting nearby. Graham walked in. He was wearing the navy bespoke suit I had laid out for him that morning. He looked powerful. He looked commanding. But he was not alone. Clinging to his arm was a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a high-fashion editorial, Vivian Sterling. I knew her name because everyone in town knew her face from the local luxury real estate billboards. She was younger than me, sharper, with a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror for hours. They walked right up to the front row. There were 2 empty seats reserved for the Pierce family, one for the father, one for the mother. Graham did not even look for me. He did not scan the crowd to see where his wife of nearly 2 decades was standing. He simply guided Vivian to the seat marked with my name. He pulled out the chair for her. She sat down, crossing her legs elegantly, and he sat right next to her. An usher hurried over to me, his face flushing pink. He realized the mistake. There were no more seats in the front. "Ma'am, I am so sorry," he whispered. "If you could just take the seat behind." I was pushed to the second row like a stranger who had bought a ticket at the last minute. I sat directly behind Vivian. I could see the label on her expensive jacket. Then, the moment arrived. "Caleb Pierce, valedictorian," the dean announced. The applause was thunderous. The massive LED screens flanking the stage zoomed in on Caleb. He looked handsome and proud. Then, the director cut to the family reaction shot. The screen did not show me. It filled with the image of Graham beaming, pulling Vivian into a tight, possessive side hug. They looked like the perfect power couple. The crowd cheered louder, assuming this beautiful woman was the proud mother. I looked down at the stage. Caleb had stopped moving. He held his diploma, but his eyes were fixed on the screen above him. I saw his confusion. Then I saw the heartbreak. His smile did not just fade. It disintegrated. He looked lost. The woman next to me leaned over to her friend. "I didn't know Graham remarried. She is gorgeous. I should have been crying. I should have been making a scene." But as I watched my husband flaunt his mistress at our son's biggest moment, I did not feel sadness. I felt a cold, metallic calm settle over me. It was a terrifying stillness. My phone buzzed against my palm. A text from Caleb. "Mom, what is happening?" I stared at the ellipsis. I could feel his voice trembling through the text. I typed back 4 words. "Do nothing. Wait for me." I lowered the phone. I realized then that the invisibility I had cultivated all my life was not humility. It was a permission slip. I had given them permission to erase me, but they had forgotten that when you erase someone, you leave them with nothing to lose. The reception at the Larkspur Grand Hotel was not a celebration of academic achievement. It was a press conference masquerading as a party. Graham had rented the Diamond Ballroom, a space that cost $50,000 for the evening, not because Caleb liked the acoustics, but because the lighting was flattering for the photographers he had hired to document his life. I stood by a marble pillar, holding a glass of sparkling water that I had no intention of drinking. The room was filled with 500 guests, a mix of business partners, investors, and local socialites who smelled of expensive gin and ambition. Graham tapped a silver spoon against his crystal flute. The sharp sound cut through the chatter, and the room went silent. He stood on the raised platform, his hand resting casually on Vivian's lower back. "To legacy," Graham announced, his voice smooth and practiced, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "Building a future is about making the right choices. I want to thank everyone for being here to see the new face of Northbridge Dynamics. And of course, we must acknowledge Elena, Caleb's mother, for doing her biological part in the early years." He said it as if I were a surrogate he had hired 18 years ago and paid off. He did not look at me. He turned his gaze to Vivian, his eyes gleaming with possession. "But tonight, I want to make a special toast to Vivian," he continued, raising his glass higher. "Thank you for standing by me and finally elevating our family image to the level it deserves. To the future." To the future, the crowd echoed in unison. I looked at the front table. Lorraine Pierce, my mother-in-law, was clapping. Her applause was precise and rhythmic. She looked like a director watching a scene play out exactly as she had storyboarded it. She caught my eye across the room and offered a small, dismissive smirk, as if to say I should be grateful I was allowed in the building. I turned and walked out. I did not run. I walked with a steady, deliberate pace until the heavy double doors closed behind me. The hallway was empty and cool. I leaned against the silk wallpaper, my hands trembling violently. It was not sadness. I was done with sadness. This was a pure, white-hot rage that had been compressed under nearly 2 decades of diplomatic smiles and silent endurance. My chest felt tight, not from tears, but from the pressure of the explosion building inside me. I pulled my phone from my clutch. My thumb hovered over my contact list. I scrolled past my divorce lawyer. I scrolled past my college friends who would only offer pity. I stopped at a name I had not called for help in over 10 years. Margot Hartwell. My mother was not a woman who baked cookies or offered a shoulder to cry on. She ran the Hartwell Dominion Group, a private equity firm known for dismantling companies that failed to meet her standards. She did not soothe wounds. She eliminated threats. I pressed the call button. She picked up on the first ring. "Elena," she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of surprise or warmth. I took a breath to steady my voice. I did not need to explain the humiliation. I did not need to describe Vivian's dress or Graham's speech. "Mom, release the claws." There was a silence on the other end, lasting no more than 3 seconds. "Already done," she replied. Her tone was casual, as if I had asked her to pick up milk on her way home. "I need your exact location and a rough head count of the board members present. Larkspur Grand, the Diamond Ballroom. Everyone is here, the entire C-suite." "Good," Margot said. "Go back inside. Do not say a word. Just stand there and be the witness." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and smoothed the fabric of my dress. My hands had stopped shaking. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer the discarded wife. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped back into the ballroom. The jazz music was playing, and Graham was laughing at something Vivian had whispered in his ear. I walked to a spot near the back wall where I had a clear view of the entire room. I folded my arms, took a deep breath, and waited for the sound of the glass beginning to crack. The vibration of the phone in Graham's breast pocket was audible even over the jazz band. He smiled tightly, tapping the fabric of his suit. He assumed it was another congratulatory text, perhaps a notification from a board member praising his bold new direction. He pulled the device out with a flourish, his thumb swiping across the screen. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. It happened in less than 3 seconds. The arrogant flush of whiskey and victory vanished, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. My mother had not just pulled funding, she had nuked the bridge. Hartwell Dominion had triggered the morality clause in their angel investment contract. It was a standard paragraph that most CEOs ignored. But Margot Hartwell never wrote words she did not intend to use. The clause stipulated that any public behavior by executive leadership deemed damaging to the reputation of the family trust resulted in an immediate freeze of all liquidity and a demand for an emergency forensic audit. Across the room, the chief financial officer of Northbridge Dynamics, a man named Marcus who usually looked bored, suddenly pressed his phone to his ear with a look of sheer panic. He had just received a call from their partner bank. The risk algorithm had automatically flagged the company accounts. "What do you mean, declined?" Marcus hissed, his voice carrying over the sudden lull in conversation. "That is impossible. We have a line of credit of $20 million. He listened for a moment, then his hand went limp. The bank had blocked all pending payments, including the $50,000 charge for this very ballroom. The whispers started in the back near the bar and moved through the crowd faster than the champagne service. "Credit is locked." I heard the word audit. "Is it an SEC violation?" Graham shoved his phone into his pocket, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He scanned the room, his eyes wild, until they locked on me. He abandoned Vivian in the middle of the floor and marched toward me. He grabbed my elbow, his grip painful, and dragged me into a shadowed alcove near the emergency exit. "Elena, what did you do?" he hissed. His voice was trembling. "The accounts are frozen. The bank just called Marcus. They cited a morality breach." I looked at him calmly. I adjusted the sleeve of my dress where he had wrinkled it. "I did nothing, Graham," I said softly. "I am just the mother of your child." Remember, Vivian had followed him, but she stopped 3 feet away. For the first time all night, she did not look like the queen of the ball. She looked like a prop that had been discarded backstage. Her smile faltered. She realized that without Graham's power, she was just a woman standing in a room full of people who judged her. "This is ridiculous." My mother-in-law, Lorraine, appeared beside us. She smoothed her sequined gown and glared at me with pure venom. "You have no class, Elena." She spat. "Trying to ruin a celebration with your petty jealousy. You are pathetic. I will have you removed from the—" Her tirade was cut short by the ringtone of her own phone. She looked at the screen and frowned. It was the chairman of the board. "Hello, Arthur," she answered, her voice switching instantly to a sugary soprano. "Yes, it is a lovely party." "What?" Her face went slack. She listened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "A vote of no confidence," she whispered. "Tonight. But we are at the gala." She looked at Graham, fear replacing the malice in her eyes. The board was calling an emergency meeting. They were not waiting for Monday. They were reacting to the sudden freeze of assets by their largest investor. I did not say a word. I did not gloat. I simply looked at them. My silence was heavier than any scream. It terrified them because they could not argue with it. They were waiting for me to yell, to cry, to give them something to fight against. But I gave them nothing. I turned around and walked out of the ballroom. Behind me, the sound of the party was dying, replaced by the frantic murmur of investors checking their portfolios. A sleek black sedan was idling at the curb outside the hotel entrance. The rear door opened before I even reached it. I slid into the leather seat. The air conditioning was cold and smelled of mint. Sitting on the other side was Miles Danner. He had been my assistant years ago, before Graham fired him for being too loyal to me. Now, he worked for Margot. He was holding a tablet, his face illuminated by the blue light of spreadsheets. "The freeze is total. Miles said without looking up. We have them in a chokehold. Drive, I said. As the car pulled away, I watched the entrance of the Larkspur Grand fade into the distance. The war had officially begun. The kitchen of the Hartwell Dominion penthouse had been transformed into a war room. The smell of expensive coffee battled with the sterile scent of printer toner. My mother's granite island, usually reserved for catering trays, was buried under laptops, whiteboards, and maps of cash flow that looked like tangled arteries. Miles Danner stood by the island. He did not look tired. He looked like a hunter who had just found a fresh track. He slid a single sheet of paper across the cold stone toward me. We found a recurring monthly transfer labeled as consulting fees, Miles said, tapping the paper with his index finger. $12,000 a month going into a shell company called Juniper Vale Strategies, LLC. It has no website, no employees, and its registered address is a P.O. box in Nevada. I picked up the document. My eyes scanned the routing numbers, but they stopped at the bottom of the page. Every corporate expense over $5,000 required an executive signature. I expected to see Graham's flamboyant scrawl. I froze. The signature was tight, angular, and precise. That is not Graham, I whispered. My stomach turned over. That is Lorraine, my mother. Margot was leaning against the refrigerator, sipping an espresso. She did not look surprised. Lorraine has been hollowing out that company for over a year, Margot said calmly. She classifies it as strategic consulting and external relations. She is using shareholder money to fund her lifestyle, and apparently to fund his... Miles dropped another piece of paper on top of the first. It was a utility bill for a luxury condominium in the downtown district, listed in the company ledger as corporate housing for visiting executives. The electric bill is not in the company name, Miles said. It is in the name of Vivian Sterling. I stared at the paper. The company was not just paying for Graham's image, it was paying for his mistress. Lorraine was not just condoning the affair, she was financing it with embezzled funds to keep Graham happy and controlled. The sound of heavy heels clicking on the hardwood floor made me look up. Tessa Crowell walked in. She was my mother's lead litigator, a woman known in the legal world as a scalpel in a silk suit. She did not waste time with greetings. Fraud is good, Tessa said, throwing her briefcase onto a chair. But fraud just gets them fined or fired. If you want to win. Elena, you need to destroy the foundation. You need to prove ownership. She looked me dead in the eye. Graham built Northbridge Dynamics on a proprietary algorithm, Tessa said. The source code is the only thing of real value. Who wrote it? The room went silent. I looked down at my hands. For 18 years, I had let the world believe Graham was the genius. I had let him take the interviews and the magazine covers while I stayed in the background, raising Caleb. He didn't write it, I said, my voice quiet but steady. He can barely code in Python. I wrote the core architecture. I built the system when we were in graduate school. Graham just pitched it to investors. Tessa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Can you prove it? Yes, I said. I have the original notebooks. I have the alpha build on an encrypted hard drive. And the metadata on the original files will have my user stamp. Where are they? Tessa asked. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. They are in the wall, safe in the study, I said. At the house. Graham will be scrambling to scrub the servers. Miles warned. If he realizes you are coming for the IP, he will physically destroy those drives. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 2 a.m. Graham would still be at the hotel, dealing with the fallout of the frozen accounts. But he would head home soon to secure his assets. I have to go back, I said, grabbing my car keys from the counter. It is dangerous, Margot said. He is cornered, I know, I replied. But that proof is the difference between a settlement and a slaughter. I turned and walked toward the elevator. I was going back to the house I had built, to steal back the life I had created. I killed the headlights as I turned onto the winding street of Stonegate Bluffs. My tires crunched softly against the pavement. I let the car coast into the driveway of the house I had lived in for 15 years, keeping the engine silent. It was a strange, suffocating feeling to approach my own home like a thief. I did not use the front door. The smart lock logs every entry time to the cloud, and Graham would see the notification. Instead, I used the physical key to open the side service door near the garage. The house was dark and smelled of stale air and expensive cleaning products. I did not turn on the lights. I used the flashlight on my phone, keeping the beam low against the floor. I moved quickly to the study. Graham was a man of arrogant habits. He believed he was the smartest person in any room, which made him predictable. Above the fireplace hung a large, pretentious portrait of our family, taken 3 years ago. I reached behind the heavy gold frame. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of a small key taped to the velvet backing. He thought no one would dare look there. I unlocked the hidden wall safe behind the wet bar. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed the 3 black leather notebooks containing the original source code algorithms. I grabbed the external hard drive from graduate school. And finally, I grabbed the heavy silver key to our safe deposit box at Ironlock Vault. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a soft blue light. I froze. The smart home hub on the wall had woken up. The screen flashed a message in bright white letters, remote access active, camera feed live. Someone was logging in. Damn it, I whispered. I shoved the items into my tote bag and sprinted for the door. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification from the security system, motion detected in study. They knew I was here. I threw the bag into the passenger seat of my car and reversed out of the driveway, tires screeching slightly. As I swung the car around, I saw it. A black SUV was parked 3 houses down. As soon as I hit the street, its brake lights flared red. They did not pull out to chase me immediately. They just sat there, a silent warning that eyes were on me. I did not drive straight to the bank. I drove like a fugitive. I took 3 right turns, cut through a 24-hour gas station, and sped through a commercial district to shake any potential tail. I spent 20 minutes weaving through the empty parking lot of a shopping mall until I was certain the black SUV was gone. I arrived at Ironlock Vault at 3 a.m. The facility was a fortress of steel and concrete, catering to clients who needed access to their assets outside of banking hours. I signed in with a shaking hand. Once I was in the private viewing room, I video called Tessa. She picked up instantly, her face sharp and alert on my screen. "Put on latex gloves before you touch anything," Tessa commanded. "I am recording this call. We need to establish a chain of custody. Narrate every single movement." I pulled a pair of gloves from the box on the table. "I am opening safety deposit box number 402. I inserted the silver key. The lock clicked. I pulled the long metal drawer out and set it on the table. "Okay," I said, my breath coming in short gasps. "I see the notebooks. I see the backup USB drives." I held them up to the camera one by one, but at the bottom of the box, beneath the technical data, lay a thick document bound with a metal clip. It was not something I had put there. "What is that?" Tessa asked. I lifted the document. "It is a high-risk credit facility agreement." I read the cover page. "For $12 million. I flipped to the signature page. My blood ran cold. There, on the bottom line, was my name. Elena Hartwell. It looked like my signature. It had the same loops, the same slant. But as I looked closer, I saw the hesitation marks in the ink. The pressure was too heavy on the upstrokes. "Tessa," I said, my voice barely a whisper. It has my signature, but I never signed this." "Hold it closer to the lens," Tessa ordered. "It is a forgery," I said, anger replacing the fear. "He forged my signature to secure the loan against my personal assets. He was not just stealing from the company, he was stealing my future." "Bag it," Tessa said, her voice grim. "Do not fold it. That paper is now the most dangerous weapon we have. The document in my hands was not merely a forgery, it was a financial death sentence. The terms were terrifyingly specific. I was listed as the primary personal guarantor for a credit line of $12 million. If Northbridge Dynamics collapsed, the creditors would not go after the company assets first. They would come for me. They would seize my trust fund, my personal savings, and the inheritance my grandmother had left me. Graham had not just betrayed me. He had leveraged my entire existence to fund his fraud. Tessa did not blink. She immediately dialed her preferred forensic document examiner, a man who had testified in federal court over 50 times. While she had him on speakerphone, her fingers flew across her keyboard, drafting an emergency motion to freeze Graham's ability to transfer or encumber any marital assets. "We need a judge to sign this within the hour," Tessa said, her voice hard. "Before he moves that money offshore?" Just then, a priority email notification pinged on her laptop. Tessa stopped typing. She opened the attachment and read the first page. "Well," she said, "he is faster than I thought." Graham had filed an injunction. He was suing me for theft of trade secrets. The lawsuit claimed I had stolen proprietary intellectual property essential to national infrastructure, my own notebooks, and requested an immediate gag order and a freeze on my assets. I expected Tessa to worry. Instead, she let out a cold, sharp laugh. "He just handed us the keys to the castle," she said, spinning the laptop around so I could see the screen. "By claiming these notebooks are trade secrets, he has legally admitted that the code is the core asset of the company. And since he sued you, he has opened the door to full discovery. We can now legally subpoena every email, every server log, and every bank record he has ever touched to prove the origin of that secret." I left the legal war room and returned to the hotel suite to check on Caleb. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the television. The news of the asset freeze was already breaking on the financial networks. Caleb was sitting on the edge of the sofa, still wearing his graduation tie, though he had pulled it loose. He looked up at me, his eyes red and full of accusation. "Mom, you made me part of a play," he said, his voice cracking. "My graduation. It was just a stage for your war. Everyone is talking about it. It hurt more than the forgery. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell him that his father had sold us out for a younger woman and a fraudulent loan, but I swallowed the bile. I would not destroy his father for him yet. I did not start this fire, Caleb," I said softly, sitting on the chair opposite him. "But I have to put it out. Please, just do not sign anything your father gives you. Do not trust his sudden generosity." My phone rang in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen said, "Unknown caller." I answered, "Hello." "They are going to pin it on me," a voice whispered on the other end. It was Vivian. She sounded nothing like the confident woman from the stadium. She sounded terrified. "Lorraine, she is setting me up as the scapegoat. She told the board I embezzled the funds." "Where are you?" I asked. "I have something you need to see," Vivian said, her breath hitching. "But not on the phone. Meet me at the Velvet Lounge, alone. If I see a lawyer, I walk." I hung up. I knew it could be a trap. But in a game this dangerous, desperation makes people honest. I grabbed my coat. "I am going," I texted Tessa. "No police, no suits. She will clam up if she sees a badge," Tessa replied instantly. "Get what you can. But remember, in this war, everyone has a price." The Velvet Lounge was a place where people went to disappear, not to be seen. The lighting was so low that the faces in the booths were just vague shapes in the shadows. I found Vivian Sterling in the furthest corner. She was not the polished, magazine-ready woman who had smirked at me on the stadium screen. She was huddled over a glass of vodka, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, her eyes rimmed with red. She looked like a woman who was waiting for the ceiling to collapse on her head. I slid into the booth opposite her. I did not order a drink. You have 5 minutes. I said, before I call the federal prosecutors? Vivian flinched. Her hand shook as she lifted the glass to her lips. I am not who you think I am, she stammered, her voice thin and brittle. I am not his girlfriend. Not really. I am a brand repositioning specialist. I own a boutique agency in Los Angeles. I stared at her. You are sleeping with my husband. It was part of the service agreement, Vivian whispered, looking down at the table. The Silver Fox package. It is designed to modernize the image of aging CEOs. Make them look virile, desirable, relevant to a younger market. The relationship, the intimacy, it is all billable hours. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced it down. It was not passion. It was a transaction, and the graduation I asked, the humiliation, was that billable too. It was a storyboard, she admitted, tears leaking from her eyes. Scene 4, Shot 1. The objective was to provoke a public outburst from you. If you screamed, if you slapped him, we had 3 photographers positioned to capture it. The narrative was going to be that you were unstable, jealous, unfit to manage the family trust. Who signed the contract, I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Not Graham, Vivian said. Lorraine Pierce. She paid the retainer from her personal account initially, then switched to the corporate shell. She told me the goal was to secure leverage for the divorce proceedings. She wanted you painted as crazy so she could take full custody of the assets. She reached into her purse and pulled out a cheap plastic burner phone. She slid it across the sticky table. I recorded them, she said. Tonight. After the accounts froze, I pressed play. The audio was grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. We need a scapegoat, Graham Lorraine's voice hissed through the tiny speaker. We wipe the Q4 servers tonight, we shred the transfer logs, and we tell the SEC that Vivian acted alone, that she seduced you to get access to the accounts. But she knows about the shell company. Graham's voice whined. She has emails. She is a whore. Graham! Lorraine snapped. Who will a jury believe, the CEO or the paid companion fix it? The recording ended. The silence in the booth was heavy. I realized then that this was not just a betrayal of marriage. It was a calculated, industrial-grade demolition of my life. They had planned to strip me of my dignity, my money, and my reputation, all while I was clapping for my son. I texted Tessa, I have the witness. I have the tape. Tessa's reply came 10 seconds later. Get her to sign an affidavit. Full immunity if she hands over the data. Miles is 2 minutes away. You are going to testify. I told Vivian, my lawyer will draft an immunity deal. You give us the emails, the invoices, the strategy decks, and the metadata. You give us everything. They will destroy me. Vivian sobbed. They are already doing it, I said coldly. I am your only life raft. Miles appeared at the side of the booth. He looked imposing in his dark coat. He nodded to me and offered a hand to Vivian. She stood up, looking small and defeated. As she slid out of the booth, she brushed past me. I felt her hand slip something into the pocket of my coat. Check the pocket, she whispered, her voice trembling so hard I could barely hear her. He keeps the real books there, just in case Lorraine ever turned on him. She walked away with Miles. I waited until they were out the door before I reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around a crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out and smoothed it against the table. It was an address for a self-storage facility on the edge of the industrial district. Gray-lined secure storage. Unit 312. I stared at the paper. It could be a trap. It could be where they were waiting to silence the only person who knew the truth. But if Graham was keeping a second set of books, that evidence would be the nail in his coffin. I stood up. Fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. I walked out of the bar and got into my car. I punched the address into the GPS. It was time to see what my husband was truly hiding. The the sky was a bruised purple as our convoy pulled into the gravel lot of gray-lined secure storage. It was 4 in the morning. The industrial park was silent, save for the hum of high-voltage power lines overhead. I was in the back of the lead SUV with Tessa and Miles. Behind us, a black van carried 2 of my mother's private security contractors. We approached the keypad for the main gate. I punched in the 6-digit code Vivian had scribbled on the receipt. I expected a red light. I expected an alarm. Instead, the gate rattled and slid open with a welcoming groan. It felt too easy. It felt like someone wanted us to walk into the trap. We drove to Unit 312. The roll-up door was not secured with a heavy padlock as I had expected. The latch was undone, hanging loosely by a fraction of an inch. "Stay in the car until we clear the corners," the lead security officer commanded. They swept the perimeter with flashlights. Once they gave the signal, Miles lifted the door. It rattled upward, revealing a small, climate-controlled space stacked floor to ceiling with banker's boxes and server towers. The labels on the boxes were handwritten in thick black marker Q4 internal. Tessa stepped forward, holding her phone up to record video. "Do not touch a single piece of paper until I tag it," she ordered, her voice cutting through the damp morning air. "If we just grab this, it is theft. If we catalog it, seal it, and document the chain of custody, it becomes federal evidence." I put on a fresh pair of latex gloves and opened the first box. It was a chaotic mess of financial printouts. I pulled out a binder from the last fiscal quarter. Then I pulled out a second binder for the exact same dates. I opened them side by side on top of a stack of crates. "Look at this," I whispered. The binder on the left is what they showed the shareholders. It shows a net profit of 8% and heavy reinvestment in R&D. I pointed to the binder on the right. "But this is the real ledger," I said, my finger tracing the red ink. "The R&D budget is empty. The money is being funneled out as operational expenses to offshore accounts." "Look at the margins," Miles said, leaning over my shoulder. Next to every major withdrawal, there was a set of initials scribbled in blue ink L.P. "Lorraine Pierce," I said, realizing the scale of the betrayal. She was not just protecting her son, she was taking a cut. 10% of every laundered dollar went straight to her. Suddenly, my phone screen lit up in my pocket. A system notification from my cloud account flashed bright white in the dim room. "Logan attempt detected. Location Larkspur Grand Hotel. GPS tracking request active." "They found us," I gasped, staring at the screen. "Someone just breached my cloud account from the hotel. They are pinging my phone to get a location fix." "Kill the phone," Miles shouted. "Battery out." "Now." I fumbled with the device, but the security officer grabbed it from my hand and tossed it into a signal-blocking Faraday bag. "We have maybe 3 minutes before they triangulate the last signal," the officer said calmly. "We need to move." We did not run, but we moved with military precision. We loaded the critical boxes into the van. We sealed the unit back up. We drove out of the facility using the rear maintenance exit, keeping the headlights off until we hit the main road. We switched vehicles at a crowded truck stop 5 miles away, blending into the morning commute traffic. We did not need to be chased to feel the pressure. The knowledge that we were being hunted by digital ghosts was terrifying enough. When we finally made it back to the penthouse, the sun was fully up. My mother, Margot, was sitting at the dining table, looking entirely unruffled. She listened to our report without blinking. "I knew he would slip eventually," Margot said, pouring herself a cup of tea. "That is why I inserted the clawback clause in the original Angel investment contract 15 years ago. I did not just give him money. Elena, I loaned it to him with a condition. If the company engages in any criminal financial activity, the Hartwell Trust automatically assumes controlling interest of the board." I stared at her. You planned this." "I prepared for it," Margot corrected. "I waited for him to be arrogant enough to make a mistake in public. Last night was that mistake." Tessa walked into the room, holding her tablet. She looked exhausted, but triumphant. "We have the kill shot," Tessa said. "I just accessed Graham's public schedule. He is not hiding. He is doubling down." She turned the screen toward us. "He is the keynote speaker at the Summitwell Ethics Forum in Harbor Point at noon today," Tessa said, a ruthless smile playing on her lips. "The topic of his speech is transparent leadership in the modern age." I looked at the screen. Harbor Point was only an hour away. "He thinks he can spin the narrative before the news breaks," I said. "He thinks he is safe on a stage." "Then let us go," I said, standing up. "It is time to show the world what his version of transparency actually looks like." I stepped into the main hall of the Harbor Point Convention Center. I was not wearing the soft, forgiving pastels of a supportive spouse. I was wearing a sharp, white, architectural suit that looked less like clothing and more like armor. I was no longer the wife of the CEO. I was the architect of the system he was abusing, and I had come to dismantle it. On the stage, Graham stood behind a lucite podium. He looked composed, though I noticed the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead visible on the giant monitors. "True leadership is about trust," Graham said, his voice amplified to the rafters. "It is about building a culture where transparency is the default setting. At Northbridge, we do not hide our mistakes. We learn from them." The audience of 2,000 industry leaders applauded politely. In the front row, Lorraine sat with her back straight, scanning the room like a perimeter guard. She looked smug. She did not see me standing in the shadows of the rear entrance. "We have time for a few questions," the moderator announced. I did not raise my hand. I simply started walking. My heels struck the polished concrete floor with a rhythmic, echoing click that cut through the silence. One row turned, then another. I walked straight down the center aisle, my eyes locked on Graham. He squinted against the stage lights. When he recognized me, his smile faltered. "I have a question regarding the transparency you just mentioned," I said. My voice was calm, projected clearly without a microphone. Elena Graham laughed nervously into his mic. "This is my wife. Everyone." "Elena, darling, we can discuss this at home." "I am not here as your wife," I replied, stopping 10 feet from the stage. "I am Elena Hartwell, the former systems architect of Northbridge Dynamics, and I would like to know why the company is paying retainer fees of $50,000 a month to Juniper Vale Strategies, LLC. The room went deadly silent. Lorraine stood up, signaling frantically to the security detail in the wings. That is an internal strategic matter," Graham stammered, gripping the podium. "Next question. It is a shell company with 0 employees and no physical office," I continued, raising my voice so the back rows could hear every syllable. "Why is our research and development budget being funneled into an account that pays for the utilities of a luxury penthouse occupied by your mistress?" There was no collective gasp. Instead, there was a sudden eerie blue glow that washed over the auditorium. It was the light of 2,000 smartphones being raised at once. They were not shocked. They were hungry. They were live streaming the execution of his career. Graham looked at the sea of screens. He panicked. "Cut the mic." He screamed at the sound booth, his mask of composure slipping entirely. "Security, remove her. She is mentally unwell, but it was too late." I held up the invoice I had taken from the storage unit. "The audit has already begun." "Graham," I said. He did not argue. He did not fight. He turned and walked off the stage, disappearing behind the velvet curtains like a fugitive. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a call from the independent director on our board. "Elena," he said urgently. "Lorraine is moving fast. She just initiated an emergency liquidation of the patent portfolio to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. She is trying to sell the company for parts before the freeze takes effect." Then a text message arrived from Vivian. "They are at the private airfield. They are taking Caleb. They plan to use him as a shield." My heart stopped. They were not just running, they were taking my son. If Graham got Caleb out of the country, he would force him to sign documents that would tie him to the fraud. He would destroy his own son to keep his money. I turned and ran back up the aisle. The reporters were shouting questions, flashing cameras in my face, but I pushed through them. I had destroyed Graham's reputation in 5 minutes. Now, I had to save my son from his legacy. To the hotel, I told Miles as I jumped into the waiting car. We have to intercept them before they get on that plane. If they get wheels up, Miles warned, starting the engine. We lose jurisdiction, and we lose Caleb. Drive, I commanded. Fast. I pushed open the doors to the private lounge at the airfield. The room smelled of expensive leather and aged scotch. Graham was sitting on a plush sofa, a crystal tumbler in one hand and a gold fountain pen in the other. A thick legal file sat on the coffee table in front of Caleb. My son looked up. He looked exhausted and confused. "Mom," Caleb said, his voice small. "Dad says you are... Well, he says you are having a mental break. He says I need to sign this to protect my tuition fund before the government freezes everything." Graham did not shout. He did not look like a man who had just been humiliated on a stage. He looked calm, paternal, and terrifyingly manipulative. "Elena," Graham sighed, shaking his head with mock pity. "Please, do not traumatize the boy any further. I am just trying to secure his future before your little stunt destroys his inheritance." He pushed the pen toward Caleb. "Just sign right there." "Son," Graham said softly, "it is just a standard transfer." I stepped forward. I did not look at Graham. I looked at my son. "Read the name of the entity." "Caleb," I said. My voice was steady. "Read the top line." Caleb looked down. "Helios Meridian Holdings." "That is not a trust fund." I said, "That is a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. It is outside the jurisdiction of the United States courts. If you sign that, you are helping him move assets out of the country. You become an accomplice to federal fraud." Caleb pulled his hand back as if the paper were on fire. Graham's face twisted. The mask of the concerned father vanished. "Sign the damn paper, Caleb!" Graham snapped, slamming his glass down. "Stop listening to her. You are not a lawyer. You are an asset in this family, and right now, your signature is the only thing that matters." Caleb froze. He stared at his father. For the first time, he saw the man beneath the suit. He realized he was not a son to Graham. He was just a tool. I pulled out my phone. "You want the truth?" "Caleb," I asked. "Listen." I pressed play on the recording Vivian had given me. Her voice filled the silent room, trembling but clear. He forged her signature on the loan documents. He backdated the transfers. He said if the debt imploded, Elena would take the fall. The color drained from Caleb's face. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Graham stood up, his fists clenched, but he knew it was over. The gaslighting could not survive the sunlight. Caleb picked up the file. He looked at it for a second, then threw it across the room. The papers scattered over the floor like dead leaves. "I would rather lose every cent," Caleb said, his voice shaking with rage, "than become a man like you." My phone buzzed. It was a text from Tessa. Judge signed the order. "Federal freeze is active immediately. Agents are 2 minutes out. We are leaving," Graham hissed. He grabbed his briefcase and motioned for Lorraine, who had been waiting by the door. They sprinted toward the exit that led to the tarmac. I grabbed Caleb's hand and we followed them out into the cold night air. The private runway was loud. The engines of the Gulfstream jet were already whining, preparing for takeoff. The wind whipped my hair across my face. Graham and Lorraine were halfway to the stairs of the plane, thinking they had made it. They thought they were faster than the law. Then, the floodlights turned on. 4 black SUVs roared onto the tarmac, blocking the path of the jet. Red and blue lights flashed, blinding in the darkness. Agents in windbreakers with yellow lettering swarmed the area. "Federal agents," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Step away from the aircraft. I saw Graham stop. His shoulders slumped. Lorraine dropped her designer bag on the asphalt. It was the end of the road. I stood there, holding my son's hand tight. Graham turned back to look at me one last time. His eyes were full of hate. "You burned it down," he shouted over the roar of the engines. "You burned everything down." I looked at him. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not burn the company. "Graham," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. I just turned on the lights. I turned my back on him and hugged my son. For the first time in years, the silence around us was not empty. It was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's chat about your thoughts on Elena's revenge. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.